Hi, and welcome to our live Winona Q&A. I am here today with Dr. Green, our Chief Medical Officer, and Dr. Brown, who is one of our Winona physicians. In today's webinar, we are going to cover the following. Dr. Green and Dr. Brown are going to give introductions. Then Dr. Green is going to talk a little bit about Winona, who we are, and what we do. After that, Dr. Green and Dr. Brown are going to answer any and all of your questions. So questions about menopause symptoms, Winona, treatments, anything that you might have, they will answer those questions. Finally, at the end, we do have a little bit of a surprise for you, so make sure that you stick around. Now I will hand it to Dr. Green.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Dr. Michael Green. I'm a OBGYN. I finished residency in '99, so I've been doing this what is that now? A long time, almost 24 years. I actually did a family practice residency first, and quite honestly found out that I didn't like taking care of sick people. It was kind of depressing, but I fell in love with women's health. I fell in love with delivering babies, and I was told I had good surgical hands. So I did a second residency in OBGYN, and I've been dedicated to women's health and taking care of women ever since. I live in a beautiful town called Lake Arrowhead, which is about 6,000 feet up in the San Bernardino Mountains. We live about 20 minutes from a little ski hill, and we skied today. So that's why I have the ski sunburn here. Dr. Brown.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kat Brown, and I'm a Winona physician taking care of patients in Pennsylvania, and now most recently added Florida as well. I live in the Philadelphia suburbs, and I have been an OBGYN since I graduated residency a little later than Dr. Green, 2008. So I've been dedicated my career to women's health. I was in the Army for 12 years, so I'm an Army veteran, and now taking care of our menopausal patients on Winona, and trying to help women in this transition in their life. So that's me. I've lived all over the country. I've lived in Philadelphia, I've lived in Texas, North Carolina. The Army had me move around a little bit, but probably the best place I've ever lived was Hawaii. So a little bit different weather that I'm experiencing now compared to there.
So let me tell you a little about Winona. So we started Winona really, it sort of hit us that there was a lot of telehealth opportunities in the male field. There are people doing, a really credible job at taking care of things like erectile dysfunction, hormone replacement for men, things like that. But there really wasn't anybody doing menopausal management or really emphasizing on taking care of women's health. And unfortunately, this is, it's embarrassing to say, but this has sort of been the history of medicine itself. The women's health has always sort of lagged men's health. And so we saw, this is a problem, and people are doing a really good job of safely taking care of men, particularly at this age where, they need help with erectile dysfunction or testosterone replacement. But we should be able to do that for women. And so that was sort of the idea of why we launched Winona. We also was sort of right at the beginning of COVID when we first started talking about this, and we realized telehealth, wow, is really kind of an important thing. And it's a shame that this doesn't exist for women. So that was sort of the push that got us going and starting Winona. So we launched Winona, it'll be 2 years in April. We currently serve over 8,000 patients, and we're adding patients every day. Fortunately, we've been successful. We think that we offer an important service to our patients, to women that are going through the menopause transition. And so we're really happy that this has been a good thing for our patients. One of the things that people ask is, well, why use Winona? Why don't I just go to my own doctor? And that's a great question. And the answer is, multiple answers to this. First of all, some people don't have good access to a doctor. And so this fills a gap. I had a patient this morning, actually, who said, gee, I just moved to a new state and I'm trying to find a doctor, but the earliest appointment I can find is mid-April and I'm miserable. So we were able to jump in the same day, get her started on treatment, so she doesn't have to wait 2 months or 3 months to feel better. The other thing is that, unfortunately, there is this sort of bias against hormone replacement therapy based on old data. and people are afraid of it, which really doesn't need to be that way. It's very safe when used appropriately. And so, I tell people, gee, you can call your doctor, make an appointment. You'll wait a month or so, you get in, you'll sit in the waiting room for however long, then they'll call you back, you'll sit in the little room for a little while, and then your doctor will come and you'll talk about, the issues, and then they may or may not prescribe you hormone replacement therapy. Then you've got to go to the pharmacy and wait in line there and pick up your medication. And if you're like me, get an ice cream cone on the way out, which is the healthiest thing. And so that's a big, long process. Whereas with Winona, get on your computer or your phone, tap, 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 and you get a physician right away. And your medications can be at your doorstep without you leaving your house within days. And so it's a much more convenient way of doing it. We all the doctors in Winona are board certified physicians, and we all have an emphasis and an interest, obviously, in taking care of not just women's health, but helping women through the menopause transition. That's why we chose this job, and that's what we're doing. So we're all sort of really good at this. It's what we have a passion for, and so that's what what you're getting. The other thing that I found interesting lately, I've actually been on 2 different telehealth platforms for my own personal health care. And I've been sort of, on the one hand, pleasantly surprised at how much better we are. I hate to sound like that, but sort of disappointed at some of the other telehealth platforms that I've used. One of them, which is one of the biggest telehealth platforms out there, every time you have a question or a doctor contacts you, it's a different doctor. And so you don't get that continuity. One of the things that we've established at Winona is that once a doctor sort of accepts you as a patient, you get that same doctor every time. Of course, every now and then somebody goes on vacation and we fill in. But in general, there's that continuity of care, which I think gets you, a better healthcare when you have somebody that gets to know you over time and understands you. The other thing was information. Gee, one of the telehealth platforms that I'm using, they have like no information about their products or what's going on, and all they have is basically make an appointment and change your billing address and your credit card. There's no information at all. There's no library. There's no blog articles. We have a very comprehensive section on our website with, I think, over 100 articles just about the menopause transition, all referenced and written by experts. So that's all available, and I think that's a really important thing, because I think that education for a patient is the most important thing. I always see myself really as an educator. My job is to educate the patient about why she's having the symptoms she's having and different ways to address them, and the risks and benefits of the various ways, so that the patient can make a good choice about what's right for her. And so that's something that we've really emphasized in Winona. And then again, the quality of care, you have a board certified physician that this is what they do. So those are all things that I found that I think Winona really shines at. Of course, I've been involved with this since day one, so I'm a little biased. But having used other telehealth platforms, I was really pleasantly surprised at what we're offering and a little disappointed at some of the other folks. So that's enough of me going on and on. So we probably should take questions if we've got some.
Yeah, our first question is, how do I know if Winona is the right treatment for me, or am I the right candidate for Winona?
So I'm going to take that one, and then I'm going to let Dr. Brown take first shot at the rest of them. But the easiest way to know if this is the right thing for you, honestly, is to go online, and we have a quiz that asks your symptoms and different things about you. And then, the results will be, gee, it seems like that your cluster of symptoms is from the menopause transition, and these medications really have the potential to help you, or, this probably isn't the right thing for you. So that's sort of a nice way just to see, gee, these things I'm feeling, is this from my hormones or is it something else? if the quiz, says, hey, this may be something that will help you, then we have an onboarding process where you'll go on, and there's really questions that will be asked of you, and those questions will change depending on your answer. There's really some AI there. We call this an online adaptive interview. But those questions are really designed, number one, to make sure that this is safe. So that's our first priority, is safety. I mean, if we take care of your hot flashes, but we cause you some horrible thing, we haven't done you any favors. So we have to make sure this is safe for your individual situation. And so those are really the questions designed to see that this is safe. We ask your age, we ask certain medical histories, certain cancer histories, have you had blood clots or strokes or heart disease, and all those things may make it so that, this may not be the right thing for you. So if you sort of survive that, and it turns out that this is safe for you, then we show you treatment options. I've built an algorithm that ultimately sort of shows you, based on all this information we've gathered, what we think will be the best treatment for you. And if that seems like a good thing for you, you say, yeah, this is something that I would like to try, assuming the doctor, agrees that this is the right thing. So there's always an important human check on that algorithm, where a real board-certified doctor is going to look at that information and make sure that everything is good. And so we then ask you to upload your ID and your photo of yourself. That's a government requirement that we have to verify your identity before we can write you prescriptions. That information then gets sent over to the doctor. We review it and make sure that everything is good. And if it is, and you don't have any questions, there's a section where you can ask questions. Then we go ahead and write the prescription and send you a note explaining everything. And then there's always an opportunity to message anytime you want. If you have a question or a concern, you message your doctor, and we'll get back to you in a very timely fashion. That was another thing on one of these platforms. There was really no way to message the doctor, which I was sort of surprised about. So anyway, that's how it works, and that's really the best way, I think, to figure out if this is the right thing for you.
Our next question is, what exactly do I need from my blood work to know how to tackle my menopause, along with what foods?
Well, so your blood work really is not really helpful for us as a physician. So, some people will offer to check hormone levels for you and check your FSH or your estrogen levels. But if you're having symptoms and your symptoms follow a pattern that we see commonly in perimenopause and menopause, that is enough criteria for us to want to treat. The levels really can vary. So sometimes your blood levels of hormones can change from day to day. They can change from the morning to the evening, based on what you've eaten before you've had your blood work done. So those levels are just not really helpful for us to determine what treatment that you need. And I think the second part of the question was food or diet. What was it, Liv?
Along with what foods?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I tell my patients to try to eat, whole foods, a lot of healthy fruits and vegetables, trying to get all the food groups, trying to eat less processed foods. Ultimately, you just want to optimize your health during this transition in your life so that your health overall is strong as you're dealing with these other symptoms that that you're trying to adjust to. So that would be my general guidance to that, is just to try to eat a healthy diet. And that's different for everybody. But I tell most of my patients to avoid the center of the supermarkets, because they're all the processed, boxed, shelf-stable stuff that can stay stable for months and years sometimes. So if you go around the periphery of the grocery store, which is where all the healthy stuff that perishes very easily, that's what you should be eating most of, is the stuff that doesn't last for years in your cupboard.
Our next question is from Amy. Just ordered and was suggested estrogen, wondering why not progesterone. General info, please.
So generally, if we suggested estrogen alone, that means you must not have your uterus anymore. So typically, the main reason we prescribe progesterone is to protect the uterine lining. So estrogen has so many good benefits throughout the body, but in the uterus, it can actually cause the lining of the uterus to overgrow. So we need progesterone to counterbalance that effect on the uterine lining when we're giving HRT. So if you were recommended to just have estrogen alone, it must be because you had a hysterectomy. That might be why. Occasionally, I have patients that still want to take progesterone, and we have that discussion and that dialogue back and forth. But the main reason we prescribe it is to protect that uterine lining. And if you don't have a uterus, you don't really need that part of it.
Our next question is from Leah. If we need our doses adjusted with each adjustment we make, will we have side effects again? For instance, if we had a side effect of weight gain and hair loss when starting, will this happen again with each dose adjustment?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think every patient is unique in how they respond to dose adjustments. And I like to kind of compare it to trying on clothes. I mean, sometimes you have to try the medication, you have to see how your body adjusts. Just like every woman likes a different cut of jeans and a different style, a different way to wear clothes. Like, we never really know how your body's going to respond until we actually try. But I've had a lot of patients that have side effects initially, but then as their body becomes acclimated, any dose adjustments they actually roll with very easily, and they don't have a lot of exacerbated side effects when they change dosages. So a lot of women do very well with changes.
I want to jump in real quick. I just want to shout out to Samantha because she sent a little note in here from Corona. Yes, you're just down the hill from me. But a little funny story real quick. Back when COVID was just in China, before everyone was wondering if this was going to become a problem and people were calling it the coronavirus. My son got a cold, which he caught from a friend of his in Corona. And so we were laughing that he had gotten the coronavirus. So anyway, that's my little Corona story.
The next question, or just this is a statement from Amy, but worried about weight gain with HRT. Is there anything?
So for most people, HRT should decrease the risk of weight gain and should make losing weight easier if the weight gain is attached to the hormones. And the reason is that as women go through the menopause transition, weight can become harder to shed, particularly central weight, the weight in the belly. Women, as they transition through menopause, often will go from having what we call an hourglass figure to more of an apple figure. That central weight, particularly the weight that you can't see that's down in the sort of in the guts, is actually fairly dangerous and can increase risks of certain health problems. Hormone replacement therapy can help redistribute that weight and move it back away out of the stomach and back to sort of where you're used to it. It should also make it easier for most women to lose weight, again, if the weight gain is caused from lower hormones. Now, some women, when they first start HRT, will have some water retention and some bloating. That's an initial side effect that usually goes away for most women fairly quickly. For some women, it takes a little bit of time. And so it can make you swell, and that makes the scale ugly and your clothes don't fit as well. And that's a bummer. But that does go away usually on its own fairly quickly. And then after that, usually weight gain is not so much of a problem and weight loss begins. That's usually the pattern that we see.
I usually recommend to my patients to ignore the scale the first 2 to 3 weeks that they start their treatment. I say just don't even get on it, just because you don't want to get disheartened when you do see that bloating or water retention. And those first few weeks, you're not going to see significant weight loss in the beginning anyway. So if you just focus on how you're feeling and how your symptoms are responding to the medication rather than looking at the scale, it's a little bit better.
The next question, and Mary, I answered your question in the chat. The next question is from Kat. What's best treatment after hysterectomy with everything removed?
Well, so if you've had hysterectomy, technically means removal of the uterus. Is what the word means. I mean, I know that a lot of patients talk about hysterectomy and they mean everything, meaning uterus, tubes, and ovaries. So technically having the ovaries removed is an oophorectomy. And if you've had your ovaries removed, you've lost your natural source of estrogen production in the body. And so depending on at what age you had the surgery done, we usually recommend starting estrogen replacement, at the time you had your hysterectomy, to help to combat, any menopausal symptoms. But also if you had a surgery like that before the age where an average woman would go through the menopausal transition, there's significant health benefits to giving you estrogen and keeping that on board until the age that you would have naturally progressed through menopause, just because it will help protect your heart and help give you all the added benefits of estrogen throughout the rest of the tissues in your body. So, typically if you've had your uterus and your ovaries removed, we'd recommend estrogen replacement. for that. And then we also have a supplement called DHEA that we often recommend to most of our patients, that when processed in the body, that breaks down into testosterone and estrogen. And so it's a natural way to kind of help boost libido and help boost your metabolism a little bit. So often I'll recommend that to patients as well.
Let me add, when women go through the menopause transition, it's generally sort of a gradual thing. So for most women, they don't sort of go to sleep with all their hormones normal and wake up and have no hormones. And the ovaries become sort of less and less efficient at producing hormones. And there's some sort of starts and stops and spurts, and that can cause issues. When you have your ovaries removed surgically, so if you have, a hysterectomy with, quote, everything removed, including your ovaries, you do go to bed one night with normal hormones and wake up the next day with no more hormones being produced. There is still some circulating hormones, but those go away pretty quickly. And it's a pretty significant transition. And for most women that undergo that, it's sort of a lot harder transition than the sort of normal menopause transition. I found that hormone replacement therapy is even more important for those women, besides the medical benefits, but also the symptoms tend to be much more exaggerated, and they tend to need a little bit more hormone to get them through that. That's been my experience.
The next statement is from Corinne. She said, my gyno stated that hormones would increase my chance of heart attack or stroke.
I think it depends on when you're starting hormone replacement and the dosage that you're starting, but actually estrogen is cardioprotective in a lot of ways. And in general, estrogen in women helps all of the tissues in our body optimize their function. So typically it helps to keep the heart healthier. So, as far as heart attack or stroke and heart disease, if you have other risk factors, such as, pre-existent, heart disease or a family history of heart disease, or you're a smoker or you're hypertensive, meaning high blood pressure, then sometimes adding hormones on top of that mix can be more dangerous for your heart than good, which is why it's really, really important that when you do your onboarding for us, that you disclose every medication you're taking and every medical problem that you have or have ever been given the diagnosis of, because we need to know all that to really determine if this is the safest thing for you, and if you would be at higher risk for some of these untoward side effects compared to other patients. So I don't know if you want to add to that, Dr. Green.
Yeah, I kind of want to bring up two things. The information that your doctor is probably leaning on is something called the Women's Health Initiative Study, which was a huge study that came out, 2002, 2003. And what was happening before then, and I was in practice at the time, is we thought hormones were good for everybody. And we were just giving everybody hormones and thought it was like a vitamin. And what the Women's Health Initiative Study said is that that's not really true. You've got to be selective about this. And so what they found was that in women that were not such a great candidate, particularly over 60 or heart disease or these things, there was an increased risk of cardiovascular problems, heart attack, stroke, particularly in the first 2 years of treatment, which was kind of interesting. After the first 2 years, things went back down to normal. And the thought was, because the hormone replacement therapy does protect the heart, there was this sort of initial shock in the first 2 years. And if you sort of got through that, then you got that protective effect. And so the consensus basically has been now, well, let's be more careful about who we prescribe this to. People under 60 that don't have heart disease, then we don't have that initial problem. All we have is the benefit. The other study I want to talk about, one of the things that we have to do as OBGYNs every year is recertify to keep our board certification active. And the way that works is they basically give us a bunch of articles and say, read these articles, and then they give you a little open book test on the article to prove that you read them. And so they kind of choose, like, these are the articles that came out in the last year that we think you need to know about. And this last year, one of the articles was this really huge study that came out by our cardiology colleagues that basically showed that hormone replacement therapy decreased the risk of cardiovascular disease when it was given to the appropriate patient. And so women that took hormone replacement therapy that were appropriately screened, lived longer and had a higher quality of life and had a lower risk of cardiovascular problems than women that had never been exposed to hormones at all. And so it was such a big study that it was our, American Board of Obstetric Gynecology said this is one of the papers you should read this year. That's how important it was, and that's basically what's the finding of that study. And so there's a lot of nuance and sort of misunderstanding about this, but in general, again, with appropriately screened patients, hormone replacement therapy is going to protect your heart.
Next question's from Robin. I'm trying to understand the reason for applying the estrogen cream on an area with no hair. Why is that important? And also if it's dangerous to others via skin or skin contact. For instance, I like to use the cream in the morning on my inner arm or wrist. Can it harm my grandson if he comes in contact via skin on skin?
You want to take that one, Dr. Green?
Sure. So the hair issue is kind of interesting. And actually, I knew this was true, and I didn't really understand why either. And I talked to our pharmacy partners. We have some amazing pharmacists that are taking care of y'all, by the way. These are some of the smartest people I know. But it turns out there are enzymes within the hair follicles that can metabolize the hormones and change the hormones, so that if you put this in an area with hair follicles, not only can it decrease the dose of the hormone that you're getting, but it also can change it into hormones that may be less beneficial. And so that's why we want you to place it on an area without hair follicles. There's actually science for that and a real reason. And then as far as the skin goes, the hormones are pretty much completely absorbed within 30 minutes. So if you're going to put it on your inner wrist or your arms, and then you're going to immediately hug your grandson, there is a chance that some of that hormone could get on your grandson. The truth is, honestly, unless you're doing this systematically all the time, it's hard to imagine there'll be enough to be any issue. But if that's going to be the situation, you could choose another place. So the inner thigh is another really easy place to apply it. It's an area that doesn't have hair follicles. And that's an area you don't have to worry about coming in contact with your grandson. So that would be sort of a workaround. So it's fine to apply it to your wrists or your inner arms if that area of skin isn't going to come into contact with your grandson within 30 minutes. But if it is, you might want to apply it to a different place.
Amy asked, am I wasting my time, money with ovulation kits when trying to figure out my cycle? I have my ovaries, no uterus, age 51.
So ovulation kits are really meant for patients that are trying to figure out when they're ovulating in order to conceive. They're pretty expensive to continuously use for any other purpose. So, I've typically only had patients use those when they're trying to time their cycle in order to time intercourse for the optimal chance for, creating a baby. So if you don't have your uterus and that's not your goal, I would stop buying those and stop wasting your money on those. Certainly if, without a uterus, we really can't tell what your cycle is per se, because we really can't time when your bleeding is. That's the main way that we can track, sorry, my daughter's asking me to do something for her. I have to open a drink for her. So really without bleeding, without a uterus, it's less important to know where you are in your particular time of the cycle. Sometimes I've had patients that can time their cycle based on their premenstrual symptoms. If they're having breast tenderness or if they're having other, ovulation pain, like some women can actually sense the pain when their ovary is releasing an egg, which we call middle schmerz. It's a little trivia question. So if you are somebody that notices those things, you could time it by that. But it's really less important to time your cycle when you're going through this transition compared to like timing it for trying to get pregnant, if that answers your question.
The next question is from Mary. Is all communication done via your website, or do you have an app we can download for quicker access? I can actually answer this one. Once you go through, I finally get a question. Once you go through onboarding, you'll be given access to the patient portal. We don't have an app at the moment, but it is on the roadmap. So not right now, I'm sorry, but you will be able to access and chat with your doctor within the portal. I don't know if you want to add to that, Dr. Green.
No, I was basically going to say the same thing. It's pretty convenient. We have talked about an app, and it is sort of on the schedule. The roadmap is probably a better way to say that. But there's some other sort of things that we think are going to be more useful right now, as the app will be a little bit redundant, but eventually we will have them.
The next question is from Kate. Is this covered by insurance?
Well, so we don't bill insurance directly just because we want patients to have access. We don't want to have to go through the red tape of trying to get prior authorizations and things like that. But you can, if you have an FSA or HSA card, you can use that to pay for your Winona meds. I've also had quite a few patients that are able to get a receipt from Winona and submit it for reimbursement. So like they pay up front and then they can get reimbursed by their insurance company, but we don't bill insurance directly.
And Kate, we have HSA and FSA links in the patient portal. Let me know if you want me to send you that in the chat. Marie, it says, is there a test I can do to see what my hormones are doing? I know they fluctuate a lot, but I still want to test.
Well, so I talked about that a little bit earlier in that, that blood work, specifically lab work for hormone testing, isn't as helpful to really tell us. So the only way that blood work is really useful to me as your OBGYN when I'm looking at a patient who's in this menopausal time frame is if I see a certain level of FSH, I can tell you that, yep, you've completed menopause, you're done. But looking at a level at some point, I can't tell you like it's going to happen tomorrow, it's going to happen in a month from now, 2 months from now. The levels fluctuate so much depending on where you are in the time of the month or where you are during the day or from day to day or even the time of the day. So they're not as helpful for us to figure out if you need treatment. Based on your symptoms is how we gauge, if you would benefit from HRT treatment.
Jacqueline said that I took the quiz, but I feel that I need more than what was prescribed. Do you deal in bioidentical hormones and use all three? I don't necessarily understand that question. Do you guys?
I think if you're talking about, so our cream contains estradiol and estriol. It's a biest cream as opposed to a triest cream. And we use only bioidentical hormones. Our pills and our patches are estradiol. The cream has a bias of estradiol and estriol. I think that's what the question is asking. If you did the onboarding and you saw the medications that it's recommending and it doesn't seem like the right thing for you, then you can message the doctor through the portal and say, gee, I'm not sure this is right. Can we talk about this before you prescribe? And we're very happy to do that. So that's a mechanism to do that. And we're very happy to have a conversation back and forth to really make sure that we get it right for you. But all of our hormones are bioidentical.
Next, Jacqueline also asked, she lives in Philadelphia as well, and asking if Dr. Brown had a practice in Philadelphia.
Which we're going to have a big day this weekend because the Eagles are in the Super Bowl. So everyone has to root for the Eagles. I just had to throw that in there. So I primarily practice, I'm on Winona doing telemedicine, but I also practice as an OB hospitalist, doing only inpatient medicine. So I do not have an outpatient office currently. So I do inpatient and I do telemedicine, unfortunately. So I don't have an office that you can come see me in, Jacqueline, sorry.
Caroline asked, she was just asking why she's only prescribed estrogen, but we kind of answered that in the question above.
Right, yeah, we covered that earlier.
Robin, in response to the question about blood work, is it helpful for you to know and consider our cholesterol and BP for determining the right medication for us?
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, I would say that for me, when I'm prescribing HRT, if I see a couple blood pressure medications on your med list, then I typically reach out to patients and I ask them if they have a blood pressure cuff at home and if they're monitoring their own blood pressure periodically, because sometimes in some patients that have pre-existing hypertension, they can see a slight bump in their baseline blood pressure after they start HRT. And sometimes it resolves on its own, but that's something that we want to watch more carefully in someone who has hypertension. So that's really the only thing. I don't really take into account, the cholesterol levels don't really change how I'm going to prescribe, estrogen or progesterone or DHEA. It doesn't really, by prescribing those, it doesn't affect your cholesterol negatively directly. So that's not something I really take into account.
Yeah, let me add, as far as the blood pressure goes, as long as your blood pressure is under reasonable control, hormone replacement therapy is safe for you. If your blood pressure is not controlled, then you really need to get it controlled first before we start hormone replacement therapy. And one of the questions on onboarding asks that very question: do you have uncontrolled high blood pressure? And if the answer is yes, you really need to see your primary doctor and work on that blood pressure and get it under control before we add hormone therapy. But once it's under control, hormone replacement therapy is safe.
And Talia said, I started in December. My boobs have been swollen and they've hurt, like really tender. Is that normal?
Well, sometimes when you first start HRT, you know, the tissue in the breast is active and does respond to estrogen, which is why we can get breast tenderness during our cycles, even when we're, before this menopausal transition. Typically, it's something that's kind of transitory and it usually will resolve on its own with time. But I would say that if you get into like the second or third month of treatment and you're still having significant breast tenderness, then we might need to tweak your dosages of hormones a little bit just to try to get that to reduce a little bit. Because most of my patients that get breast tenderness and swelling notice that it's temporary initially and then it improves.
The next question is from Colleen. I'm interested in hormone treatments, I'm in early menopause from a hysterectomy. I'm interested in hormone treatments to help with osteoporosis and protect against fractures. Is this a good treatment? That's her first question, so we can answer that one first.
Yeah, so really there's great benefit in taking hormone replacement therapy to help prevent osteoporosis, but we don't really prescribe it solely for that reason. I think that it's important that if you're having other, side effects or other symptoms of menopause and we're trying to address those, then it's a good adjunct to help prevent osteoporosis. But if you have absolutely no vasomotor symptoms, meaning hot flashes, night sweats, you don't have any other, issues like that you want to directly treat with a hormone replacement therapy, there are other osteoporosis medications or prevention medications that are out there. But for most patients, it can be very helpful while it's also taking care of the menopausal symptoms.
Yeah, I always love a 2-for-1. If you can find one medicine that helps with lots of things, that's great. So if you're having symptoms of the menopause transition, the bonus is it also helps prevent osteoporosis, helps prevent heart disease, these other things. But it's, again, right, if that's all that's going on, I want to prevent osteoporosis, there's other medications that can do that.
Her next question is, I had horrible symptoms from prescription synthetic hormones. Is it possible that I will not have these symptoms with bioidentical hormones?
Certainly it's possible. Like I mentioned earlier, trying medications is kind of like trying on clothes for each patient. But one of the most popular hormones that's prescribed, and it's kind of the go-to that everyone knows because it's been around the longest, is Premarin. And I love talking to patients about Premarin because when they find out the origin of the medication, it's actually kind of interesting. But on the packet, you'll see it says conjugated estrogens, meaning that it's a bunch of different types of estrogens that are kind of thrown into this medication. But Premarin literally comes from the words pregnant mare's urine. So it actually comes from the urine of horses. So it has a lot of non-human estrogens also that can be contained in that drug. So I've had a lot of patients not do well with that and have significant side effects from having estrogens that aren't even important to their own body. So I think that many patients do better with more bioidentical hormones that are meant to really help directly with what you need.
The other thing I would add is that if your experience with synthetic hormones is from birth control pills, and all birth control pills use synthetic hormones, the dosing with birth control pills as well as the type of hormone are very different. And the side effect profile can be very different from hormone replacement therapy, particularly bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. So if you're a poor experience, I have a ton of patients who didn't tolerate birth control pills at all and do fine on hormone replacement therapy. They're really, even though the name sounds similar and they both use estrogen and progesterone, they really use not only different types of the hormone, but also very different doses. And they're really sort of different beasts. Your experience, if it was with birth control pills, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a similar poor experience with a bioidentical HRT.
The next question is, I have 2 markers for Alzheimer's. Should I take estrogen to hedge my bets against this being a possible reason for it?
Well, so kind of along the same conversation as taking estrogen to prevent osteoporosis. I wouldn't take estrogen, just to prevent your risk of Alzheimer's. So there is, data out there that shows us that sometimes women that are on HRT have a slow progression to Alzheimer's, or they can have a decreased risk of it. But like we talked about earlier, if that's the only reason you're taking the medication, then you might be, exposing yourself to risks unnecessarily if you're taking it for that only reason and not really for what the medication's intended for, which is to treat, menopausal symptoms. So I wouldn't take it just solely to prevent Alzheimer's.
The next question is from Robin. If I still have my cervix but no uterus, does using estrogen still pose the same problem with uterine lining? Is that the same as endometrial tissue, which is still present in your cervix?
Well, so technically, yes. So it all depends on the surgeon and the technique. So when we do what's called a supracervical hysterectomy, which is when we retain the cervix but take the uterus, there's no roadmap. There's no dotted line that tells us this is cervix and this is uterus. And so there's always there's a chance that there could be that endometrial lining or the uterine lining. That's the same thing. We talk about endometrial stripe or uterine lining. There's also always a chance that there could be some of that tissue in that higher part of the cervix. So if you take estrogen that's unopposed, meaning it doesn't have the progesterone to balance it, and there could be endometrial glandular tissue in the top of the cervix, then you still could be at risk for that tissue overgrowing. And so that's still a potential risk.
I would say that a question you can ask yourself is, did you continue to have cyclical bleeding after your hysterectomy? So if you had your hysterectomy where they left your cervix in, and you never had another bleeding episode after that, it's unlikely that there's endometrial tissue there that's going to cause a problem. On the other hand, you had your hysterectomy and you get spotting once a month, that's a pretty good indication that there probably is endometrial tissue there that could put you at risk. So that's kind of in my way, sort of an easy, dirty way to sort of, gee, is this a risk or not? So I'm kind of a big picture guy, and that's kind of an easy way to think about it.
The next question is from Mary. How long can women stay on HRT? When it's time for you to go off, do we get menopausal symptoms again?
Well, so the average patient's on HRT anywhere from 3 to 5 years on average. So, whenever a patient feels ready, we can have that discussion of whether or not they want to try to go off the medication or not. And there's always a chance that when they stop the medication, they might get some slight rebound symptoms, but not every patient experiences that. So to me, if we stop the medication and you do very well and you're feeling great, then that's a sign that your body's ready to stop. So everyone's unique. I'd say that every woman's experience is unique. And so it's a conversation that you'd have with your doctor and that we talk about. But I'd say the average woman, maybe 3 to 5 years that they're on it, depending on the age at which you start. So there's a large range at which we can start having menopausal symptoms and we actually complete that transition. So the average age of menopause in the US is 51, 52, but we can have symptoms for 10 years or more leading up to that. And so if you start HRT in your early 40s, because symptoms have started then, maybe you're going to be one of the people that are on HRT a little bit longer just because you had symptoms start earlier. So every woman's unique.
Yeah, I would add that it's totally reasonable to try, after you've been on it for a few years, try going off of it. And if you find that the symptoms come back, we can always restart. So I sort of recommend, choose a time where it's not don't do it just before your kid's wedding or something, where, there isn't this critical thing coming, a relaxed time. And so that if the symptoms come back, it's not that big a deal. We can restart you and get the symptoms back under control. But I think it's worth a trial every now and then because there's no point being on medication that you don't need.
Right, exactly.
The next question is, how are Winona doctors different from my treating physician? Why are you willing to prescribe HRT and my doctor at Kaiser is not?
Well, Kaiser's a California thing, Dr. Green. So I'm going to punt that to you because Kaiser's the big California conglomerate.
Kaiser, and I don't know why, but Kaiser is a big problem with HRT. It's sort of their mantra. They don't prescribe HRT. And I'm not really sure why that is. But it certainly is. I have a ton of patients in because I'm in California, that are sort of Kaiser refugees. They're miserable. Their doctor won't prescribe. I don't prescribe HRT, and so we take care of them. I've had a few. It's kind of interesting. Early on, I had a lady who was in that situation. We got her some hormone replacement therapy, and she felt great. And about, I don't know, 2.5 months later, she messaged me, "I'm so grateful for what you did. My doctor saw the change, my Kaiser doctor, and saw how it was helping me, and said, okay, he's willing to prescribe it. So now she's going to do it." And I said, well, great. I've educated somebody, this time a physician. So I'm not sure what it is about the Kaiser system, but really the standard of care is to be open to hormone replacement therapy. This I don't prescribe HRT is really, I mean, honestly, it's kind of a mean thing to do. It's first of all, it's not based on the latest data. It's really based out of fear mongering. And maybe, I don't know if this is the case or not, maybe that Kaiser is so risk averse, it's easier to just let people suffer than give them a medication, that in their mind might have some risk involved. I mean, everything we do in life has risk. Driving to the office has a risk. The risk of HRT is extremely small. It's not zero. Nothing is zero in life, but it's really small. But if you're a big, giant health company and, if you're more interested in lowering your risk than taking care of your patients, that may be, what's going on. I'm not saying for sure that is, but I have a suspicion that's part of it. And, again, safety. We don't want to take risk either. We want to make sure that you're healthy, but we also want to treat your symptoms to make you feel better in a very safe way. So, maybe that's the difference. It's hard to say. But again, your doctor at Kaiser is probably a generalist OBGYN. And so I can tell you, when I was in private practice doing general OBGYN, I didn't do a whole lot of HRT because most of our practice is made up of pregnant people and taking care of them, and birth control. And there's a lot of that goes on, and a lot less of hormone replacement therapy. I've written more prescription for hormone replacement therapy in the last 2 years than my entire career before that, because that's what I'm concentrating on now. And so your Winona doctors are concentrating on this. We're keeping up on the latest literature. This is what we think about. This is what we do. And so we're really up to date on what's safe and what's the right way to do it. And that may not be true of your generalist OBGYN.
The next question is, can menopausal women get pregnant while on HRT?
It's unlikely, but not impossible. So in general, our fertility declines significantly after the age of 40. It takes another very deep dive after 45. But it's not impossible. There's occasionally a woman who'll get in the Guinness Book of World Records and conceiving, after the age of 50. But it's very, very rare. So we are born with all the eggs we're ever going to have. And each year that we're living, those eggs are dying off. And so by the time we get to that decade, the 40 and 50s, we have very little eggs to release. But it's still a risk. So if you were to start HRT and you're having cycles regularly, and then suddenly you miss a period, you should take a pregnancy test. And if you do find out that you're pregnant, you should stop HRT right away and let us know, because we won't want you to continue the medication if you're pregnant.
The good news, if that were to happen, is that HRT is not going to harm the baby. So we know that birth control pills don't cause birth defects. And we use progesterones and progestins in early pregnancy all the time for other aspects. It's not something that you want to continue if you're pregnant, but at least you haven't done it any harm. But it is important to know that hormone replacement therapy is not birth control. And so if you're still at risk for pregnancy, don't even think about relying on hormone replacement therapy to prevent that, because it's not going to do that. So you still need another method. You need a method of birth control if you don't want to be pregnant. If you're actively trying to get pregnant, you really shouldn't be on hormone replacement therapy either. You should be doing things to get pregnant rather than be on HRT. But we have had over the last couple of years a couple of patients that I know of that did get pregnant while on HRT, and we just asked them to stop the hormone replacement therapy. No harm to your baby, and then they can decide what they want to do with that pregnancy.
Can you please explain why often the first thing offered for perimenopausal women is birth control and not HRT to treat symptoms?
Well, so I would say most generalist OBGYNs feel very comfortable prescribing birth control. And so, they have a lot of patients on it. They have experience with dealing with how patients react to it. And so that's their go-to, just because it's their comfort level and their experience. It doesn't mean it's the best way to treat, because like we mentioned earlier, the birth control doses of hormones are very different than what we would give with HRT. And also how those hormones respond in your body is very different. So it's not an ideal treatment, but I mean, if your doctor's willing to try that, but not willing to prescribe HRT, it might be worth a try, but it's not going to be the best treatment compared to the HRT that you could be taking.
The other thing that's interesting to me is that birth control pills have higher risks than HRT. And so it kind of blows my mind, these docs that are afraid of HRT, but will throw birth control pills at this, even though they don't work as well. So you're getting something that doesn't work as well, but has higher risk and more side effects. But it really, I agree with Dr. Brown, it really has to do with doctor's comfort level. It's what they're used to, it's what they're comfortable with.
It's like they have a false sense of security because they use it a lot, and they see, they have a lot of patients on it. So they just kind of feel more comfortable with it.
But it doesn't make it the best thing or the right thing.
Right.
We're getting towards the end, so I'm going to start cherry picking questions. How should I transition from birth control to HRT?
Well, so depending on what birth control you're taking, that's a conversation that we can have. If you're taking a combination estrogen and progesterone birth control pill, and you're starting to have symptoms that are bothersome, then we can make that transition pretty easily. I do have patients that still need the contraceptive portion of being on the pill, and we can add HRT to help combat the symptoms that they're having while they're still taking birth control. We can do that safely depending on the dosages that you're taking. But a lot of patients are able to make the switch. In general, if a patient comes to me and has no symptoms of menopause, but is on a birth control pill, I usually recommend they stop the birth control pill by age 50. In general, that's our guidelines. But I've had patients that want to hold on to it forever and they don't want to go off it at 50, but that's usually what we recommend.
So the next question is, how do we know if we need DHEA or just the estrogen and progesterone?
Well, it's really a matter of what your goals are and what your symptom profile is. And so, when I look at a patient's onboarding and I see, what their symptom list of their initial symptoms that they report, if I see someone that's complaining of, significant weight gain, fatigue, low energy, low libido, then I'm going to talk to them about adding DHEA into the mix as well, because I know just by experience that the DHEA is going to help with that energy level. It's going to help give them, some impact against that daily fatigue that they're fighting. And it's really, every patient's unique. So I have a lot of patients that use it and that do very well with it, but every patient is different.
The next question is, can you please discuss the Blossom product? Wondering if this is literally liquid Viagra, is it safe for women with heart palpitations during menopause?
So let me take that one. It is basically liquid Viagra. It's essentially Viagra in cream form. The difference though between Blossom and oral Viagra is that it's really a topical application. So it really works just at the area that you apply it. So, usually around the clitoris, and it increases blood flow. And really shouldn't be an issue systemically. So if you're having palpitations or other problems, it's not going to affect you as if you had taken an oral Viagra pill. So it works well for what it does. For a lot of women, they really like it. I had a conversation yesterday with someone who wanted it, and for reasons that it wasn't going to work for. It's like, oh no, that's not really what it does. But it does, help with the sexual response. It helps make orgasm easier to achieve, and can be higher stimulation. So that's sort of what it does. But it doesn't, it's a topical, so it's not going to get in and really get into your blood system and cause problems.
This is next question's from Andrea. She was recommended the estrogen, progesterone cream, and DHEA. Do I start using the cream on a daily basis, no matter where I'm at in my cycle? Also, I believe my disrupted sleep is related to being in transition. Would it be best to use the cream before bed for better sleep and then the DHEA in the morning for energy?
Very smart, Andrea. I think that you're on it. So, most patients, if they need the sleep benefit, and sleep disruptions are very, very common in this perimenopause and menopause transition. I have a lot of patients that complain about that. And so I think that taking the cream before bed is very helpful for a lot of patients, but I generally recommend taking the DHEA in the morning. I think that it does help with that energy level throughout the day. So I think that's a good option for you.
There are, sorry, real quick, totally agree with that. But once in a while, you get a patient that has the opposite response from the cream. The progesterone, for most people, it's sedating. But once in a blue moon, it does the opposite. And so if you find that you use the cream and you're like up all night and you can't get to bed, then switch it in the morning. It's totally okay to experiment around with different times of the day. That's a totally safe thing to do. And everybody's unique, so find out what works best for your body is totally fine to do.
Okay, people are upset with Kaiser in the chat. Go on.
Sorry, I didn't mean to dump all over Kaiser.
Not upset, but they're just like, a lot of people had the same experience. Dora said, do I need a prescription to buy the product that I see online? She's suffering from hot flashes, weight gain, headaches.
Yeah, so the medications that we are prescribing to patients are prescription medications, so that you will need, to have a legit prescription from us in order to get the medication. You'll see other people and other sites that are selling estrogen without a prescription, but typically those are doses that are so low that they're not regulated and they don't need a prescription. So you can even find stuff on Amazon, but it's not real medication and it's not going to be helpful with your symptoms. But if you want our treatment, just get on the website, fill out the medical history questionnaire, and maybe see if this might be best for you. And you can do the onboarding and we can get you hooked up with a prescription.
And actually, you don't get a piece of paper. We mail you the medication, so you get it right to your home. But it is prescription medication prescribed by a board certified physician.
Andrea asked, what are some adverse symptoms to look out for when you start your estrogen and progesterone?
Well, so I've had patients mainly complain about with the estrogen, with breast tenderness. I've had some patients complain that sometimes they've noticed a change in the odor of their sweat or the change in their skin. Sometimes they can, notice that with taking DHEA as well, that their skin can get more oily. With the progesterone in particular, we can get slowed GI motility. So sometimes they can complain of more constipation, that bloating kind of sensation as well. But every patient's unique. I mean, if you read the side effect profile of any medication, there's like this exorbitant list of all the possible things that can happen. It doesn't mean that's all going to happen to you. But I would say most commonly with the estrogen, it's the breast tenderness. And most commonly with the progesterone, it's the constipation and bloating type symptoms and drowsiness, really.
Yeah, you're going to get a scary sheet with your medications that has this giant list of everything that could ever go wrong with you. So just think about, when you're watching TV at night and you see advertisement for some medication, the first 15 seconds tells you this is the greatest thing ever, and the next 45 seconds tells you how it's going to kill you. So it's the same thing. That's a legal thing we have to include. But really, the side effect profile is pretty minor, and most people do really well with it.
Okay, so we're at time, so I'm going to stop with the questions. But if your question wasn't answered, I'm also linking the YouTube that has a lot of our past webinar FAQs on there, so you can go through those and your question might be on there. Also, after you complete onboarding, you can talk to a doctor after the onboarding is completed. But we wanted to thank everyone for sticking around until the end, and so we would love to give you 40% off your first treatment plan. And so I'm going to put that in the Slack as well, or in the chat as well. And basically this will just take you to the beginning of that onboarding. I'll let Dr. Green talk a little bit more about what the onboarding consists of, but after you go through that, the discount will be applied at checkout.
So yeah, and let me just say, we don't use like discount codes that you can do a web search for discount codes and stick that in at the end. So in order to get the discount, you use that that link, and that tags, I don't know, the developers have a magic way of tagging you, and then it knows to give you that 40% discount, but that's how you get it. When you onboard, we'll ask some demographic questions, but mostly we're going to be asking questions that are going to be really designed to number 1, 2, and 3, make sure this is safe for you, because that's really the most important thing. And please be honest. Every once in a while, I get a patient who denied certain things, and then I can tell by their medication list, wait a minute, why are you on this? It's like, oh, I don't want to kill you. So these are real medications with real potential risks, and as long as we're able to screen you correctly and make sure that these are appropriate medications, they're incredibly safe, but given to the wrong person, they can cause harm. So it's really important that you're honest and that you complete the onboarding as completely as you can. Then there will also be questions about preferences. Would you rather have a pill or a patch or a cream? They all work great. It really comes down to sort of personal preference and cost, and we'll show you that. And then there'll be a recommendation, then again, we'll ask for your ID and driver's license. The government requires that, and then your credit card. And the credit card won't be charged until we actually approve the prescriptions. There will be a place for you to send a message, or one of the questions at the end is there anything else you'd like your doctor to know? And so if there is, please fill that out, and we'll make sure that those are all answered. And then we look at everything and make sure that this is this is a safe thing and potentially going to be helpful for you. And if so, we go ahead and approve the prescription, and we explain everything to you. And then that gets mailed to you usually in a matter of days.
Awesome.
You're muted.
You're muted. You're on mute.
We almost got through it without me doing that. Okay, I'll also link to the page where if you have questions in the future, you can join future webinars. There you go. Well, thank you everyone for attending, and we're here every month, so join future webinars and you can talk to Dr. Green and Dr. Kat. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
Good night, everyone.